The head, heart and guts, assonance, alliteration, iambics, rhetoric needing big breaths, powerful lungs, lingual stamina, labial stamina, memory stamina. It's food, great, gorgeous, steaming tureens of food.
I mean, that says it all. I mean, it's got wonderful energy, it's great physicality. It doesn't have a lot of emotional nuance. But it's fine, and it's fine. I thought this one, the political.
But I am more panic-stricken than he, and I'm going to stick to my text and perhaps later address those questions. 23 years ago, in May 1981, there was a gathering at once solemn and dangerous in the village of Toombridge, near where I grew up in Northern Ireland. The crowd were assembled to meet a hearse that contained the body of a well-known local figure. And once the hearse arrived, the crowd would accompany it back to a farmhouse on a bog road a few miles away, where the body would be waked in traditional Irish style by the family and the neighbours. But before the remains of the deceased could be removed that evening from Toombridge, they had first to be removed from a prison some 30 or 40 miles away. And for the first leg of the journey, the British Army and the Northern Ireland Police Force deemed it necessary to take charge and treat the body effectively as state property. The living man had, after all, been in state custody as a terrorist and a murderer, a criminal lodged in Her Majesty's prison at the Maze, better known in those days as the H-Blocks. He was a notorious figure in the eyes of Margaret Thatcher's government, but during the months of April and May in 1981, he had figured prominently also in the eyes of the world's media. His name was Francis Hughes, and although I did not know him personally, I knew and liked other members of his family. They were our neighbours, and during the 1950s, I had walked with his sisters, flirting on the road to Mass. I had worked side by side with his father in the bog. My father had been at school with his father, etc. Now, however, Francis Hughes's world and my world were far apart. For the last 59 days of his life, he had been on hunger strike, one of the group of IRA prisoners ready to make the ultimate sacrifice for what were known at the time as the 5 demands. Basically, these demands constituted a claim by the prisoners, a claim to political status, a rejection of the demonizing terminology of criminal, murderer, and terrorist, an assertion of their right to wear their own clothes, to abstain from penal labour, to associate freely within their cell block, and so on. Well, faced with these demands, of course, the Thatcher government was predictably inflexible, and between May the 5th and August the 30th, 1981, 10 hunger strikers died. It was a cruel time. The nobility of the sacrifice was placed in the balance against the need for state security and order. But whatever side you were on in this tussle or tragedy, it was still possible to regard the hunger strikers, on the one hand, as an exercise in real politics, and on the other hand, as an occasion of sacred drama. There were undoubtedly huge propaganda rewards for the IRA in this spectacle of volunteers fasting to death for a principle. But even so, many on the nationalist side of the fence felt very cautious about expressing public support for them, however noble their sacrifice. Support for that fast could be read by the IRA and by others as support for the violent methods of the IRA. So many people hesitated. But in their hesitation, they were painfully aware that they were giving silent assent to the intransigence and overbearing of the Thatcher position. Margaret Thatcher, who stated with a too brutal simplicity, crime is crime is crime, it is not political. Nevertheless, the rage in the crowd as they faced the police that evening in Tunbridge was political, but it was more than that. If ever there was a dramatisation of the contest between what Hegel called the instinctive powers of feeling, love and kinship on the one hand, and the daylight gods of free and self-conscious social and political life, it was that evening when the hearse with its police escort arrived on the village street, and the cordon that surrounded it was jostled in fury and indignation by the assembled friends and neighbours and supporters. The nationalist collective felt that something inviolate had been assailed by the state. They felt that the police action was a deliberate assault on what the Irish language would have called their duchas, something that was still vestigially present even in 21st century Ulster. The Irish critic Brendan Devlin has remarked about this word, this term, this concept, duchas. He says it's more or less untranslatable, but of course once you say that you proceed to try to translate it. He says of duchas, in an effort to explain it in English, the Royal Irish Academy's Dictionary of the Old Gaelic Tongues uses such terms as inheritance, patrimony, native place or land, connection, affinity or attachment due to descent or long standing, inherited instinct or natural tendency. It is all of these, says Devlin, and besides an elevation of them into a kind of ideal of the spirit, an enduring value amid the change and erosion of all human things. End of quotation. If you want to set words to describe the feelings that motivate the heroine of Sophocles, Antigone, you could hardly do better than that, because Antigone, the daughter of Oedipus, is surely in thrall to patrimony, connection, affinity and attachment due to descent, to long-standing, to inherited instinct and natural tendency. And in her case, all of these things have been elevated to a kind of ideal of the spirit and enduring value. And if we wanted, what's more, to find a confrontation that paralleled the confrontation between Antigone and King Creon, you could hardly do better than the incident on the street in Tunbridge. And no doubt many of you recognize the quotation from Hegel that I employed in relation to the incident, which he employs in his discussion of the tragedy, Sophocles' tragedy. In particular, the quotation applies to the conflict between Creon, representing the law of the land, and the daylight gods of free, self-conscious social political life, and Antigone, who embraces the law of the gods, instinctive powers of feeling, love and kinship. Anyhow, you probably also recognize the bearing that this has upon the changed title, the title I dared to change from Antigone to the burial of Thebes. From beginning to end, Sophocles' play centres on burial. First, it is a matter of burial refused to Antigone's brother, but refused to Polynices, and Creon makes anathema because he is a traitor to his native city. And this unbending attitude brings out the resistor in Antigone. The chorus calls autonomous. She defies the law, defies the order, and gives ritual burial to the brother. The laws of the land, she avers, cannot overrule the laws of the gods. And from this fundamental opposition, the whole catastrophe follows. For burying her brother, Antigone is herself buried alive inside a rock-piled mound and hangs herself, and so on. But the whole catastrophe issues from this. The result is a play, of course, where Creon's suffering also weighs heavily, perhaps weighs equally, question mark more, in the tragic Sophoclean scale. So much so that, of course, it has been remarked often that the title of the Antigone could well be the Creon. And it was this possible switching of titles that gave me the freedom and made me transgress and call my version Burial of Thieves. I was asked, as has been said, to translate this play for the Abbey for their centenary, which occurs this year, but I was unsure really whether to accept it. To tell you the truth, when they said Antigone, I said, oh my God, not another Antigone. I mean, like everybody else in my generation, I had begun reading Greek drama, in particular Antigone, when I was at school, when Greek drama was discussed in my own education in terms of, almost entirely in terms of Aristotle's Poetics, in terms of tragic flaws, unities, plot, and so on. But of course things did move on in the meantime, and Antigone is now discussed not so much as an imitation of an action, but as an accumulation of issues of various sorts and various productions. My own rereading of the play, for example, began in the particularly distressful circumstances of Northern Ireland in 1968, in the month of October. On the 5th day of October 1968, in the city of Derry, a civil rights march, which had been banned by the Northern Ireland government, was baton charged by the Royal Ulster Constabulary, by the police, a nakedly repressive action which set in motion a chain of events which are still unfolding. Over 40 years, huge political and constitutional changes followed from that moment of the baton charged march in Derry. But there were literary consequences also. All of a sudden, Antigone was sprung from her old place in the school syllabus and entered decisively into all future thinking about the developing situation in Northern Ireland. And one thing which helped to effect this change was a single magazine article. A couple of weeks after the march in Derry, Antigone and all she stands for were invoked by the Irish writer, diplomat, intellectual, provocateur, whatever you want to call him, Conor Cruise O'Brien, who at that time was the holder of the Albert Schweitzer Chair of Humanities at New York University. In America, O'Brien had been active in protests against the Vietnam War, and on one occasion had got himself arrested, a witness on a civil rights disobedience campaign. His article was printed in the BBC current affairs magazine, The Listener, and it was written, I should remind you again, 1968, at a time when, in O'Brien's own words, Creon continues his interminable series of rash engagements. Suppression of communism in Asia, suppression of freedom in Czechoslovakia, white supremacy, and every other form of supremacy of the supreme. The article begins, however, with a resume of the plot of Sophocles' tragedy, and O'Brien emphasizes the consequences of her non-violent action, how they turn into acts of violence, issue in acts of violence, the suicides of Haman and Eurydice and so on. And he points up, of course, the analogy between this and the violent aftermath of civil disobedience campaigns, the assassination of Martin Luther King, the assassination of Gandhi. O'Brien is well enough disposed even so. Assassinations granted. He is well enough disposed to the civil rights campaign that was happening at the time. But he said that the people who were taking these measures on these civil rights marches, on this disobedience campaign, they would have to brace themselves, he says, for shocks to come. And he then proceeded to ask the kind of question that Ismene asks in the play. Would the removal of the disabilities of Catholics in Northern Ireland be worth attaining at the risk of precipitating riots, explosions, pogroms, and murder? And this was before 3,000 people would die in subsequently the next 30 years. Even so, having raised these doubts, O'Brien was prepared to grant Antigone her right he says, Antigone will not heed such calculations. She is an ethical and religious force, an uncompromising element in her being, as dangerous in her way as Creon, whom she perpetually challenges and provokes. Peace depends upon the acceptance of civil subordination, since the powerful will use force to uphold their laws. We would be safer without the troublemaker from Thebes. And that which would be lost, if she could be eliminated, is quite intangible. No more, perhaps, than a way of imagining and dramatizing man's dignity. It is true that this way may express the essence of what man's dignity actually is. In losing it, man might gain peace at the price of his soul. It would be interesting to give an account of O'Brien's subsequent turns and returns on this topic, but I've said enough to make two simple, obvious points. Antigone was a play which, for my generation in Ireland, was utterly fascinating, not just fascinating, a necessary focus and lens for understanding where we were ourselves. And secondly, because it was such our allegory, because it was so belonging to us and had been so worked over, I was reluctant to repeat the terms of it. Conditions in Northern Ireland, moreover, have changed. The allegory doesn't fit the situation that pertains there now. What we have in Northern Ireland now is more like a squabble in the agora than a confrontation of the barricades. But if the local row has abated, the global situation has worsened. Things that were once the preoccupation of an embattled and apparently historically retarded population in Northern Ireland, these things have now come inescapably to a head for everybody. People in liberal democracies now find themselves forced to take a position on in conflicts where God is invoked by both sides. And they find themselves faced, over the world, they find themselves faced with the great challenge which W.B. Yeats said he was faced with, the challenge which he articulated memorably and inescapably, the challenge, he said, to hold in a single thought reality and justice. That'd be a very good epigraph for the complete works of Sophocles, to hold in a single thought reality and justice. The question of dochus, if you like, and dignity, the scandal of the supremacy of the supreme, exercised without check or embarrassment, the fact that one man's criminal or murderer or terrorist is another man's freedom fighter or martyr. None of these complicating and distressful realities has gone away. On the contrary, the fundamental crisis has deepened, and the voltage generated in the mere discussion of some of these matters has increased to a degree that is explosive and often destructive of all civil discourse. The world does not look anymore with liberal dismay at the polarized sectarian ghettos of Belfast. On the contrary, those ghettos look out with eagerly partisan eyes at a polarized world, to the extent that some loyalist ghettos in Belfast now fly the Israeli flag, and the Republicans answer from their roofs and chimneys with a display of the Palestinian flag. Night after night, we watch on the TV the crowds surging around the piers, borne shoulder high, carrying the dead through the streets of Fallujah or Ramallah. You watch the military with their cordons and so on. And as you watch all this, it's impossible not to think of the passions which were barely contained when that hunger striker's body James hands at tomb. To think that those kind of passions have now been let loose to an apocalyptic effect. Sophocles' presentation of domestic and civic troubles in ancient Thebes has indeed great staying power. And in the midst of the aftershocks running through the post-September 11th world, his play still functions in the way Wallace Stevens wanted poetry to function, namely as a help to the imagination. A help, he says, to make the imagination press back against the pressure of reality. But in certain moods, Even the incontrovertible steadiness and clarity of Greek tragedy can seem almost too Apollonian. We may want Goya instead of Sophocles, the Goya of disasters of war, the Goya of the shootings of the 3rd of May, the Goya who looked at the Napoleonic liberation of Spain with the same shock that the artists in Iraq must have watched the bombs falling in Baghdad. In our own time, acts of terrorism committed against those who wield Napoleonic power have driven them to a point where the impulse to retaliate is in danger of overwhelming all need to understand what lies behind the terrorism. It was possible to feel, for example, that there was something not so much Napoleonic as Roman about the images of the prisoners in irons being marched in front of the world to their cages in Guantanamo Bay. It was as if we were witnessing a triumph on the Via Appia. Respect for Duchess and dignity were set at naught. In Sophocles' play, Creon turns Polynices into a known person in much the same way as the first internees in Northern Ireland and the recent prisoners in Guantanamo Bay were turned into known persons. By refusing Polynices' burial, Creon claims ownership of the body and in effect takes control of the spirit. Because the body will not go to its right home, the spirit will not go, to its right home until the body is buried with due ceremony. When Antigone refuses Creon's ruling and performs the traditional rites, her protest is therefore a gesture that is as anthropological as it is political. And it was only when I saw the play in this light that I found a way out of its cat's cradle of political arguments and analogies and back into it as a work a tremble with passion, with all the human terror and pity it possessed in its original cultural setting. And the eye of the needle that I passed through to re-enter the kingdom of Thebes was an Irish one that I found in the nick of time the night before I went to see the director of the Abbey. As ever, and as David Wiles has just raised, the problem was how to get started, how to get the tuning fork struck so that we could begin. I could get the meaning of the words from other translations. I have to confess I do not have ancient Greek, but I had several venerable prose translations to get the meaning from it. But verse drama, this is where we pick up with David. Verse drama, even in translation, needs the meaning to be transposed into a metrical and musical register. And unless you can find that register, you are doomed to remain in the ranks of those whom Osip Mandelstam, the Russian poet, described as purveyors of the paraphrasable meaning. And suddenly and luckily, I did hear the note to which I could tune the translation. It came into my mind very quickly. Theme and tune coalesced when I remembered the opening lines of an 18th century poem in the Irish language, a poem called Caino Ordi Léri, which is on the handout, a few lines of it. It goes, the opening lines, Mohrab Dain Ho, Lada Wakahu, a Kunti and Origi, Hugmahoil Iragich, Hugmahri Tagnadich, Jelius of Caravat, Awad o Wadanan. And it goes on, it is Rusk. I say that my ear heard this, picked it up from nowhere, but of course the listening posts of the unconscious had been attending all along, and they came up with the right register. The circumstances of the death that this poem laments are similar to the circumstances in which Polynices is left in Antigone. The poem is called in English The Lament for Art O'Leary, and it was uttered spontaneously by O'Leary's widow. That's how it began, in the tradition of oral, spontaneous keening. It was uttered over the dead body of her husband. And this body, like the body of Polynices in the play, had been left exposed, unattended to, cut down by enemies and abandoned. O'Leary was killed in 1773. He was a defiant Irish Catholic captain, one of the defeated native Gaelic-speaking order, and obviously a troublemaker, a provoker of the English squirearchy in his home district in County Cork. At any rate, he was set upon and attacked by a group of soldiers and left for dead in the roadside. And after that, the horse ran home with blood on the bridle. And the poem was uttered, as I said, by the widow shortly afterwards. I'll just give you some of the lines in translation which helped to get the tune for me. There's a three-beat line, Triniter, as it were, so on. My love and my delight, the day I saw you first beside the market house, I had eyes for nothing else and love for none but you. I left my father's house and ran away with you, and that was no bad choice. You gave me everything. My mind remembers that bright spring day, how your hat became you, your silver-hilted sword, your manly right hand. The English bowed before you, not out of love for you, but out of hate and fear. My own love and my mate, that I never could think dead till your horse came home to me. That I went and found you lying by a little furze bush, without a holy bishop or any priest or cleric to whisper you a prayer. Only an old woman and her cloak about you, and your blood in torrents. Because of the pitch of that voice, because the lament was for a beloved left lying without the last rites, and because I needed a meter to get the love and panic of those sisters in that first exchange of the Antigone, I picked up the pulse and the ritual force of those lines in the opening lines of the translation that I would do. The first speech in the play, I just scribbled it out suddenly that evening with the same meter. Ismene, quick, come here. What's to become of us? Why are we always the ones? There's nothing, sister, nothing. Truth hasn't put us through just because we are who we are, the daughters of Oedipus. And because we are his daughters, we took what came, Ismene, in public and in private, hurt and humiliation. But this I cannot take. Now, there is nothing very colourful about the language. It's bare and there's no figures of speech, but the three-beat line established a tune that could be carried. It has the sound of sense, as Robert Frost says. And once you establish a tune, it's easy enough to play variations. The speeches of the chorus, for example, almost spoke themselves partly because I had been working in the meantime on the Beowulf, which Professor Deagle mentioned, that I had done 3,000 lines of more or less alliterating verse, so it had entered my ear a bit more. And also I had Tony Harrison's Oresteia behind me, again, that northern alliterative Old English speech rhythm. So those things were there, but that voice of the elder, which I heard on the road to school myself, growing up in a local, I grew up in Colonus myself in a way, with old people on the roadside telling you, learning's easy, Clary, stick to the books, son. And this elder speech is quite well suited to the gnomic Anglo-Saxon meter. Anglo-Saxon gnomic poetry is full of the kind of obvious truths that you were given yourself, and I was given as a youngster. Water is wet, yeah. Fire is hot, yeah. So, anyway, the first utterance of the chorus, which I sketched out again for the artistic director to show him the next morning, came naturally enough. Glory be to brightness, to the gleaming sun, shining guardian of our seven gates. Burn away the darkness, dawn on Thebes, dazzle the city you have saved from destruction, and so on. And needless to say, unfairly perhaps, to Creole, I've said elsewhere, Creole has to hold the line in every sense. So I gave him, inevitably, the iambic pentameter, the line holder, to honor patriots in life and death. I thought I might, before I would just finish, I have a concluding paragraph which I'm going to hold. I might read a few extracts of the different voices. I take David's point that perhaps these characters are armoured in their own voice, and they don't have a limberness that perhaps they might have. Nevertheless, it was a hell of a help to me to get through the play. So I just do a little exchange between Ismene and Antigone at the beginning. These aren't on the handout. Then a piece of the chorus. Then Ismene and another chorus, and so on. Just to get the different melodies into play. Ismene is telling Antigone, you know, okay, calm down. We have to obey the law. In the land of the living, sister, the laws of the land obtain, and the dead know that as well. The dead will have to forgive me. I'll be ruled by Creon's word. Anything else is madness. Antigone, you are the laws of the land. Sister, let me tell you, from now on, and no matter how your mind may change, I'll never take your help. I will bury him myself, and if death comes, so be it. There'll be a glory in it. I'll go down to the underworld, hand in hand with a brother, and go with my head high. The gods will be proud of me. The land of the living, sister, is neither here nor there. We enter it and we leave it. The dead in the land of the dead are the ones you'll be with longest. And how are you going to face them? How, if you dishonor their laws and the God's law? How is meaning? How? And the chorus, this chorus I trimmed a bit. I took out some. Yeats thought that the prose was good enough for the audience in the Abbey. I think they can take more than that, but there's only a certain amount of Greek mythological and Greek topological lore they could take, so I trimmed it a bit of its mythological densities. But I think that this chorus, spoken out directly to the audience by an Irish actor, was listened to. That's in a sense all I wanted. Glory be to brightness, to the gleaming sun, shining guardian of our seven gates. Burn away the darkness, dawn on Thebes, dazzle the city you have saved from destruction. Argos is defeated, the army beaten back, all their brilliant shields smashed into shards and smithereens. Like a golden eagle, the enemy came swooping, like an eagle screaming down the sky, hoping to set fire to the seven towers. But the dragon of Thebes had grown teeth. We overwhelmed him on the walls, and Zeus blasted his overbearing. A god of war stiffened our will and locked our arms, so the line held. Glory be to brightness, to the gleaming sun. Glory be to victory. I can feel her wings fanning the air. The joy in my eyes is like the joy in hers, dazzling the city she has saved from destruction. Race the chariots and run to the temples. Drum the earth from early to late. The Dionysus lead us and burn away the dark. Glory be to brightness, to the gleaming world. And then the chorus introduces Creon. Remember, he says, King Creon, all hail to Creon. He's a new king, but he's right for this city at this moment. Now we will know what's what, why he has sent for us to be privy to his thinking. Iambic pentameter. Gentlemen, we have entered calmer waters. Our ship of state was very nearly wrecked, but the gods have kept her safe. So friends, well done. You from the start have been a royal loyal crew. You stood by Oedipus when he was at the helm, and when his son stepped in to take his place, you stood by them as well. But now they're gone, two brothers badged red with each other's blood. And I, as next of kin to the dead and doomed, I'm next in line. The throne has come to me. QED. Voila, bang bang. I just read another little bit. Antigone's last speech. Tony was talking yesterday, we were talking about the way in which, in the introduction to his Oresteia, he quotes Peter Hall as saying, actors going eyeball to eyeball for 30 lines of blank verse isn't all that interesting. And he was saying that the audience had eyes too, and they reflect back. And in some of these speeches of Antigone, it was possible for her to stand and direct her speech to the audience. I hadn't read Tony's or talked about this, but it happened on the stage quite successfully. At her very last speech, she says, "Now gods of Thebes, look down. Through my native streets and fields, I'm being marched away. And never, you men of Thebes, forget what you saw today. Oedipus's daughter, the last of the royal house, condemned. And condemned for what? For practicing devotion, for a reverence that was right." And the audience, or the chorus, and David is quite right, I think I relish doing the choruses more than anything else. This is a shortened version of the chorus after that. She goes off into her rock-piled roof, and the chorus, or my chorus rather, not the chorus, my chorus says, "Danae too was walled up in the dark, princess daughter imprisoned by her father, barred and bolted in a tower of brass. Then molten Zeus, a battering ray of light, oh flash and cloudburst, blossom stripping shower, ungirdled and dishevelled her with gold. Fate finds strange ways to fulfill its ends. Not military power, nor the power of money, nor battlements of stone, nor black-hulled fleets can fend off fate or keep its force at bay. Cries of the wind, weeping heard in the palace. Whoever has been spared the worst is lucky." In poetry, we only believe what we hear. Antigone is poetic drama, but commentary and analysis, in my own case, have dulled it. I wanted to do a version that would be true to the original insofar as it would be as much musical score as dramatic script, one that actors could speak as plainly or as intensely as the occasion demanded, but one that still kept faith with what I took to be the ritual formality of the original. I talked a good bit earlier on, I know, about the cultural and political resonances which the text possessed, because these resonances constituted what I call my title deeds. They gave me a claim to do it. But the real title deed was written in, I think, when I thought of changing the name from Antigone to The Burial at Thebes. Putting burial into the title signals to a new audience, a non-classical Irish ordinary audience. It signals to them the central concern of the play, or one of the central concerns. And because it is a word that has not been entirely divorced yet in English from primal reality, because the word burial reminds us, however subliminally, of the solemnity of death, the sacredness of life, and the need to allow in every case the essential dignity of the human creature. Because of that, I was happy to use it in the title. Wherever you come from, whatever flag is draped over your coffin, the word burial carries with it something of your duchas. It emphasizes, in other words, those instinctive powers of feeling love and kinship which authority must respect if it is not to turn callous. Powers which will nevertheless conspire, or nevertheless continue to inspire the one whom Bruce O'Brien called the troublemaker from Thebes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Healy. Tony Harrison is a man of many roles: poet, playwright, translator, filmmaker. Molière, Racine, Victor Hugo. With these, he has achieved fame on the London stage. But it is the literature of classical Greece, which he studied at university in his native Yorkshire, in the north of England, which
I'm going to read quite a few extracts from the Trackers of Oxyrhynchus, which is a modern play with an ancient heart, which is the Ichneutae of Sophocles. It was the joint production in Delphi in 1988 between the Cultural Centre of Delphi and the National Theatre Studio. I bought the work in London, and it had its world premiere here, then went back to the National Theatre and also toured in Europe. I've always been interested in satyr plays since, as a schoolboy, I played the role of Cyclops in Shelley's version of the satyr play of Cyclops. And I found, unfortunately, there were no other satyr plays to gratify my taste. And when we look at the list of what we've lost, it's a rather sad one. When we look at the record of the plays that we have and the plays that we don't have, for Aeschylus we have 7 found plays, and the lost plays are 83, with about 20 satyr plays. For Sophocles we have 7 found plays and 116 lost plays, including about 30 satyr plays. And for Euripides we have 19 plays, but we have 61 lost, including about 15 satyr plays. And in some ways I feel we can't understand the tragedy without the satyr play. I've always believed that. Anyhow, I began, before I read, I'm just going to, I don't like videoing or preserving theatre. I've always committed to ephemerality, but there are a few slides that I have from Jocelyn Herbert's archive, which I'll put the play into context. I think the best description of the play I can read is from Dr. Hunt's announcement to the Egypt Exploration Society in 1907. And he says, 3 years ago, we were indebted to Oxyrhynchus for some extensive remains of a lost tragedy of Euripides, the Hypsipyle. It is now the turn of Sophocles, and most fortunately, the discovery to which I refer represents a side of the poet concerning which we have been very much in the dark. As you know, it was customary to produce tragedies in trilogies or sets of 3, which were followed by a satyr drama. And he goes on to describe the plot of the play, which is as follows. The play is the Ignutai, or the Trackers, which practically nothing beyond the title was previously known. And he goes on in his announcement to Exploration Society to give us the plot of Apollo losing his cattle and getting the satyrs, the chorus of satyrs, to track by sniffing at the track to find the lost cattle of Apollo, which in the meantime have been used by the overgrown baby Hermes to create part of the first lyre, first musical invention of the prototype of the bouzouki, I call it in the play. And then it's sort of the play peters out. What I wanted to do was to make the trackers in my play are not only the satyrs of the original play, but the archaeologists looking for papyrus in the deserts of Egypt. It was discovered in 1907. I'll show you some of the bits and pieces that are left of the play.
There are almost 50,000 documents were discovered in the rubbish tips of this ancient city. And there's Grenfell and Hunt, the Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson of papyrology. And outside their tent, and this is their tent in the Delphi Stadium, and you can see Justin Herbert's given, I did a lot of research in the Egypt Exploration Society archives, and with those photographs then she made, this is our Oxyrhynchus rubbish tip and Grenfell and Hunt. I make them put the different things into boxes, into the literature goes in one box, and all the petitions and economic signs of economic distress and tax records go into another box. These are the boxes, and you see, like, fortunately I could put Egypt Exploration Society 1907, so I didn't have to say what the date was. And these boxes were formally organised by Grenfell, who was obsessive about organisation, but unknown to everybody else. They contained I was Toff Marshall yesterday spoke about misdirection, and I was going to use on the back of the hanging papyrus in the stadium, I was going to project these Jocelyn designed from one of the most ancient images of satyrs. Unfortunately, I think it's because Apollo gets a really bad press in my play. On the night of our technical rehearsal, there was a fierce wind, and it smashed all those to pieces. They were entirely destroyed, so I had to abandon. That. And then bang out. The audience were invited to chant. This is like British pantomime. The audience were invited to chant fragments of the Greek. It was Ithage, Bodaba, Sitoilen, bang! All the boxes open, and the satyr chorus arrived, and the ancient play began. These are Jocelyn's designs for Silenus and the satyr. The satyr has an erect phallus, and Silenus for a limp one for a long period of drinking. Brewer's droop. There they are, the papyrus, the fragmented papyrus behind, and they dance with, I used the metaphor of the British, the clog, the wooden shoes, which were representing their part of their animal nature, so they're half man, half goat. And there was a very good clog dancer, who had also a good Irish step dancer, who did the choreography.
There they are, opening again. I didn't have time to paint the papyrus on the inside of the boxes. That's what it is in the National Theatre in Delphi. It just had the tracks of the cattle. You can see now for the stadium and the dancing floor, the open boxes provide a fragmentary dancing floor in which the satyrs danced and searched for the play. And these I set fire to, I burned down. At the end they were turned into football hooligans to satisfy a system of exclusion, and they sprayed the name of Marsyas, the satyr who was flayed for competing musically with Apollo, and those were burnt down. But I used the whole stadium. Then they rolled the papyrus into a ball and played a game of football with the empty frames. That's Kylene, Juliet Stevenson. She was like a caryatid with a pediment on her head. And you can see the papyrus behind it. This is Hermes, who is he's a wonderful actor, Brian Glover. He looks like an overgrown baby. He invented the lyre in the age of 5. He was originally an all-in wrestler. He was a wonderful man. He played God in my mystery plays at the National Theatre. He was wonderful. And at the very end, the lids of the boxes, I felt had a curtain call for Sophocles, because the boxes had lids in which we had the letters of his name, and the satyrs bring them on, and they don't read them, but the two papyrologists put them in the correct order. And Sophocles got his curtain call. And then after I'd done the production, I went to Oxyrhynchus. You see, they're still wearing the same clothes, using the same tools to dig with. I went back to Oxyrhynchus, about 100 miles south of modern Cairo on the Nile, near Benessa. And I went there for a specific reason. I went to here's the rubbish tips of Oxyrhynchus. And I went to pay my homage and also to bury my own text. You can see this book. I buried the text in the rubbish tips of Oxyrhynchus. I think that's enough slides. That's just to give you an idea of some of the background to the play. It starts with the obsessive. We know that Grenfell had 3 nervous breakdowns. I made him haunted by Apollo. Apollo is in his head saying fragments from the papyrus of the Canuti, and he wants it found because he has a star part. He gets his lyre in it. And Grenfell is goes mad and becomes turned into Apollo. And he's worried about the fellaheen, the natives are not handling the papyri gently enough and so on. And he says, these chaps are fellaheen, can't see what's unique about scraps of old papyri in ancient Greek. We ship back papyri and decipher them at Queen's, but the natives used to use them as compost for their greens. These treasures of a soul-enriching ancient tongue shoveled onto barrows and used like so much dung. Just imagine, Homer, Sophocles and Plato used as compost for the carrot and potato. They even burn papyrus for the fragrance it releases and fumigate their fetid tent with long-lost masterpieces. Papyri, insects gnaw them, time corrodes, and native plants get potted in a mulch of Pindar's odes. Horrible to contemplate. How can a person sleep while Sophocles is rotting on an ancient rubbish heap? Here at Oxyrhynchus, our present excavations lived up to and surpassed all our expectations. Crate after crate shipped off, load after load, from laundry list and ledger work to tragedy and ode. Though I'm peeved to report, so far this expedition's pretty short on poetry, but piles up these petitions. Now these are petitions like theatre nasties, don't make me homeless. And I used this in the end in the National Theatre production, because the theatre itself is surrounded by homeless people. The modern satyrs are transformed when they're excluded from art. They become modern homeless around. You always see as you go in and out of the theatre. One of the other things Grenfell and Hunt found, which I included in the Delphi production, was a hymn to the people of Delphi by Pindar. And we used that, we actually performed it and sung it to the people of Delphi. But here it's a release, because it mentions the word of Apollo, it releases Apollo in the mind of Grenfell. And he's obsessively going through all these papyri. Census, petition, more stuff of that sort, judicial proceedings, minutes of the court. Oh, what's that? Something that I almost missed. The verso of that Oxyrhynchus census list. Oh, it's Pindar. Pindar! But not all there. After all those petitions, I was beginning to despair. A paean by Pindar, hitherto unknown, Castalias, Apollonos, Famina, Delphone. A paean by Pindar, hitherto unknown, a hymn to Apollo, lost till this minute, Castalia, Apollo. Thank God I'm in it. The voice from Apollo comes. And you hear the fragments of the Ichneumon. Give that bezel. And Apollo and Grenfell and Apollo have this debate. That paean was fine and full of my praises, but I want the play where I speak the phrases. But I'm working as fast as I possibly can. I suppose that you are, being only a man. Please, Digger, please go away. I'll pursue you until you track down my play. I promised I'll get out of my mind. No, till you find it, I'll stay right behind. I have a pistol, Apollo. I might have to shoot. And you might just regret that, Grenfell, old flute. Find the papyrus and fill in the gaps. I'm working too hard. I'm damn near to collapse. Do you realize how much time we require? Do you realize I require my lyre? Remember Cassandra? I brought her to heel. I would have thought that I had her appeal. Don't be too sure. Just keep on the track and remember Apollo's right at your back. Somewhere there's a play where I come on first. Stop it, my brain's going to burst. Such literary finds are regrettably few. Bernard, old boy, I'm counting on you. I found this one. Will this one do? If I get a part or a mention or two. It's a poem praising Theon from 3 AD. Praising Theon? What about me? Where, may I ask, did you study your Greek? What's dead to you, dear? I actually speak. I know Greek a damn sight better than you. Heptatolon kiresi, shall I construe? Heptatolon kiresi liven, polyikia kluon, the lyre exchange for the bulls of Apollo, the rest difficult Greek that you might not follow. Almost an alpha, I think that you passed. Don't get gamma minus rammed up your arse. But you know very well that this fragment won't do. There's not enough of it. I'm mute, and the you isn't me that the poem's lines extol. I want the Ichneumon and want it made whole. It's not a piece that you scholars know, so just for starters, some fragments go apang, crash, go to hell, and he has his collapse, but bang, comes Apollo, the satyrs burst out of their boxes with the help of the audience, and track down the lost cattle and find the giant baby Hermes with the lyre. And I made Apollo the art supreme, a man who, you see him on his statue on the top of every opera house in Europe. In the Paris Opera, he's brandishing his lyre as though he's just won the World Cup of football, and it's mine. Anyway, he acquires the lyre and he plays. At last he goes, the first Apollonian arpeggios. Simply by plucking these magical strings, I can raise my soul and man's to higher things. deserts, a papyrus torn to tatters, theft, a trail of turds and sniffing satyrs. From that unpromising, unlikely start, from barrenness and shit, we have brought art. This mottled tortoise, this creeping thing, joined to my cattle, makes dumb nature sing. De-beaved, bereaved, but now I can rejoice that what was dead and dumb now has a voice. I rather think the tortoise population will be proud to make music for higher creation, proud to be the sole purveyor, supplier of the principal part of Apollo's own lyre. The gods decreed a fixed scale in creation, from the Olympian like me to the crustacean, and almost at the bottom of the scale, even below your sort with hoof and tail bearers with no part human, come creatures like this tortoise who are dumb. The scale of creation, like a scale with notes, runs the whole gamut from gods to goats, and distinctly closer to the latter, low on the scale of being, comes the satyr. He plays, and the satyrs, who are always one of their functions in satyr plays, is to witness new inventions, invention of wine, sculpture, fire, and in this case music, and they love it, but when they want to use it, Apollo turns nasty. Oh, they say, it's wonderful, let's have a go. No, 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 no. My advice is stick to being satyrs. Don't go meddling in musical matters. You don't need lyres. You're natural celebrators, stuck between animal and human status. You need no consolations of high art, your human pains cancelled by your horse-goat part. What use are lyres to you? Your satyrs stamp and strut has no need of these 7 strings of gut. You're satyrs, satyrs. Your sort need no lyres while your goat parts tether you to brute desires. Your capers and your clog staccato clatters exactly no racket expected of satyrs. My lyre will create that sort of elite that will never get caught out tapping its feet, or think for a second that twanging these strings gives license for furtive fandangos and flings. Apollo's new public won't prance. They'll keep so still when they listen, you'll think them asleep. Your music, and I put that firmly in quotes, is suitable only for brutish men goats. The point of my music is to put a stop to your type of prancing and clippity-clop. This is now my lyre, and I define its music as half human, half divine, and satyrs half beasts must never aspire to mastering my, and I mean my, lyre. But I have to grant you that you did the bit I couldn't descend to, sniffing the shit. Yes, I have to concede that you sniffed out the track and got me what's left of my cattle back. You kept your promise, my cattle got tracked. You'll get what I promised, as per our pact. There's gold for you all, though no doubt you'll fritter the whole bloody lot on barrels of bitter. Gold and freedom. You're free if you stay where you belong, in the crude satyr play. And they're given their gold bars, which were ghetto blasters wrapped in gold foil. And Apollo creates, I always used to use, whatever theatre I was in, projections of the National Theatre, all the temples of culture which are dedicated to Apollo. And he goes on, I foresee in ages yet to unfold my statue in temples of marble and gold. Palaces of culture with gold statues of me will preside over music and poetry. Where I am on the pediment, where I preside, no creatures with tails will set clog inside. They track down my lyre, and now that I've thanked them, their clogs aren't allowed in my musical sanctum. That holy of holies was never intended for creatures with dicks so grossly distended. Any one item, cock, clog or tail, puts them beyond the Apollonian pale. When the lyre casts its spell, men won't remember the satyr with clogs and disgusting great member. In my world of music, I set the tone in a thoroughly clogless, de-satirized zones. While I am the one with the lyre and the wreath, satyrs will always be pushed underneath. And the image of the Theatre of Dionysus of satyrs with the stage on their heads was also one that I used. He then wants the play to be destroyed, so the evidence of the satyrs being involved in the creation of music at all is there. So he makes them destroy their own play. He says, in order to win this lyre that I'm strumming, I had to go in for some serious slumming. Now the lyre's been invented, and in my God's grip, the papyrus goes back on the rubbish tip. I don't think I ever want to leave clues that music's supremo had to shit on his shoes. There'll be in the future an unbridgeable split between the spirit of music and mere mention of shit. No clue should remain I had any connections with clog-footed satyrs with gruesome erections. If it's ever deciphered, the papyrus there proves Apollo consorted with creatures with hooves. Henceforward, Apollo will only guest star in a thoroughly satyrless repertoire. Because I think that tragedy, we can't understand tragedy unless we also know about satyr plays. I also found myself in this satyr play turning it suddenly tragic on its head, because as the satyrs are rewarded, Apollo takes charge of culture. We hear a scream, and it's the scream of Marsyas being flayed. The satyr who found the flute, the aulos of Athene, and learned to play and challenged Apollo to a musical competition. And there are images in art, the Titian is the most famous one of the satyr hung upside down, flayed, while Apollo plays his violin. It's that terrible question we have to face about people being flayed while we practice our arts. So the scream, and Silenus comes on. This was played by Barry Rutter, but David Wiles spoke about an actor that I've had a lot of association with. Silenus runs on. That's Marsyas screaming. They ripped off his skin, and all he ever wanted was to join in. Marsyas suffered his terrible flaying for a bit of innocent aulos playing. The aulos, Athene's flute, she flung it away. So why shouldn't Marsyas pick it up and play? A few blows, and the goddess gave the flute she just invented, the elegant boot. She flung the thing aside. Do you know why? Well, think of the aulos. Ever had a try? You puff your cheeks out like this when you play, and she didn't like her face to look that way. She thought it unattractive. Well, it's true, her cheeks looked like balloons when she blew. And who should find the flung thing in the grass but my brother satyr, Marsyas? Questions of cosmetics scarcely matter to one who has the ugly mug of a satyr. It's not for good looks that us satyrs are noted. So Marsyas blew and let his cheeks get bloated. He took himself off to a quiet bit of wood and gurned and puffed and grunted and got good. That peeved Apollo. He'd crossed the bounds. Half-brutes aren't allowed to make beautiful sound. And can't you just hear the muses say, who gave a common satyr license to play? Music's an inner circle meant to exclude from active participation a beast so crude. How can he be a virtuoso on the flute? Look at the hooves on him. He's half a brute. His one and only flaw was to show that flutes sound just as beautiful when breathed into by brutes. It confounds their categories of high and low when your Caliban outplays your Prospero. If Marsyas had touched it and said, oh, the way us satyrs are supposed to do, but he went and picked it up and blew the flute, and that was trespassing for the man brute. For them, it would have been quite enough to have given it one abortive puff, a buffoonish ballooning of the brutish cheeks producing a few and inexpert squeaks. That would have amused them and been okay, but Marsyas, man, animal, learned to play. To have watched him smell it, test it with his teeth, or use it like the pygmies as a penis sheath. All allowable, all tolerated fun. But your Apollonian goes for his gun when it suddenly dawns on him that the swine the pearl is cast before by one divine knows it's a pearl and not some novel food, and aspires beyond dumb swinitude. When he enters the culture the pearl represents, they reach for their skin-removing instruments. They set up a contest, rigged from the start, to determine the future of high and low art. They had it all fixed that Apollo should win, and they ordered my brother to be flayed of his skin, and the Phrygian skinner with his flaying blade saw Apollo's pointing pinky and obeyed. While Marsyas suffered his terrible flaying, Apollo looked on with his doodah playing. While the Phrygian flenser slices and flays, Apollo plucks out a glib polonaise, and the skinners applauded Apollo's reprise as my brother's flayed nipples flapped onto his knees. The last thing Marsyas saw was his own skin, like a garment at his feet with no one in. Wherever the losers and the tortured scream, the liars will be playing the Marsyas theme. You'll hear the liars playing behind locked doors when men flay their fellows for some abstract cause. The Cythera cadenza, the muses mezzo trill, cover the skinning and the screaming still. Wherever in the world there is torture and pain, the powerful are playing the Marsyas refrain. In every dark dungeon where blood has flowed, the lyre accompanies the Marsyas ode. Wherever the racked and the anguished cry, there's always a lyre player standing by. Some virtuoso of Apollo's violin plays for the skinners as they skin. He thinks, so I don't make waves, I don't rock the boat, I add up the pluses of being man-goat. Unlike my poor flayed brother Marsyas, I've never yearned to move out of the class. In short, I suppose, I'm not really averse to being a satyr. I could do a lot worse. I just have to find the best way to exist. And I found, to be frank, I exist best pissed. Thank you.
Первый раз я стал знакомиться с культурой Греции еще в театральной школе. Мы там читали гекзаметры. У нас был замечательный педагог, знающий очень хорошо греческую историю. И я благодарен был, потому что у меня хоть какое-то было представление, потому что мы читали гекзаметры и увлекались этим, благодаря блистательному педагогу, который так знал хорошо греческую культуру. Это первые какие-то шаги, которые я предпринял для того, чтобы вот какие-то корни иметь, для того, чтобы как-то осваивать эту блистательную драматургию, из которой все вышло. И Шекспир, и наш Пушкин. У нас были прекрасные ученые, как господин, ушедший навсегда, Персифон, господин Аверинцев. Он был просто великий знаток вашей культуры, и этой культуре многие страны обязаны. И мне приятно, что в этом доме, которому 20 лет, мы имеем честь почтить Софокла. Это очень важный дом, в котором мы находимся, дамы и господа, ибо он действительно внедряет вашу уникальную культуру, вашу драматургию, комедию, истоки театра, которые благодаря вот усилиям, во многом усилиям этого дома, начали возрождаться в Европе и в Америке. И когда я получил вот заказ, контракт ставить Электру, я прежде всего, конечно, начал вот снова вспоминать всему, чему меня учили педагоги. Педагоги речи, учили технике, как сделать, чтобы летел звук далеко, чтобы он имел диапазон, чтобы можно было освоить эти тексты прекрасные. Это сложное занятие, очень сложное. И первая проблема вставала всегда: как решать хор. Об этом я беседовал с покойным Аверинцевым, он был знаток, и мы говорили, какие приемы можно употреблять, чтобы, ну что ли, звучало в наше время, которое чрезвычайно уплотнилось, и мы с моими коллегами дорогими пришли к выводу, что сейчас должны быть сильные по энергии спектакли и очень короткие. Ну, максимум около 2 часов. Это максимум, иначе это невозможно удержать публику. Время бежит, время убегает от нас, и нам некогда его ощутить по-настоящему. Потому что глобальные события идут, которые берут нас за горло. И поэтому мы вынуждены все время искать новые формы, новые театральные формы. И в данном случае, конечно, ваша культура дает к этому просто какую-то, что ли, стартовую ракету, которая может вырваться туда, в неизведанное. Поэтому всякие эксперименты, вот в нашей кампании театральной Всемирной Олимпиады мы всячески искали и поощряли. И мной был сделан такой вывод, что лучше всего получаются эксперименты, когда культура Греции передается на основе своей национальной культуры. Потому что, например, в русской культуре Пушкин, которого мы глубоко чтим, как блистательного поэта, а не как либретиста к опере, что часто очень слышат на Западе. Ах, это тот Пушкин, который писал либретто. И начинаешь тогда с ними говорить, что это не совсем так, что он написал Бориса Годунова пьесу, которая не хуже Шекспировой. А в Борисе Годунове чувствуется влияние и Электры, и Антигоны, и, конечно, Шекспира. И вот эта нить у нас идет до наших дней. От Пушкина, от греков к Пушкину, от Пушкина к Шекспиру, от Шекспира к Пушкину и дальше в современную драматургию, которую кто-то пытается находить и искать каждый свои формы. И поэтому я и начал в Электре проблему хора решать. Я решал ее по-разному, то есть в какой-то мере персонификация персонажей хора. Пытался туда всадить какое-то брехтовское отстранение, когда нужно. Потому что Брехт, создатель политического театра, тоже, в общем, опирался в какой-то отдаленной мере на вашу культуру. Но я дал слово не быть многословным, Поэтому, если ты меня хочешь что-то спросить, я готов. Или в заключение я попытаюсь, как могу, прочесть монолог из Антигоны. Последний ее монолог. А могу ответить на вопросы, если господа, дамы и господа пожелают. Что их интересует в моей персоне, если у вас есть интерес ко мне.
At the end. At the end.
Монолог?
Прочитайте.
Прочитать монолог. Правда, я бросил актерское занятие давно, 40 лет назад. Театру 40 лет. Хорошо, я попробую. Подземная гробница, ты мой вечный приют, увы, мой свадебный чертог. Я ухожу навеки к вам, о тени, любимый, бесчисленный, к вам, сошедшие в жилище Персифоны. Теперь я последний иду, покинув жизнь до срока, но с надеждой, что встретите вы радостно меня, отец и мать и милый брат. Бывало, с молитвами я каждому из вас надгробное творила возлияние, обмыв тела, украсив и почтив. И вот теперь за то, что полиника я предала земле, иду на казнь. Но добрые меня прославят, верьте, что если бы я матерью была, то вопреки законам ни супруга, ни сыновей не погребла бы. Нет, вот почему других детей и мужа могла бы я иметь. Когда бы муж или сын погиб, но не другого брата, за тем, что мой отец и мать туда ушли навек, откуда нет возврата. О, милый мой, я чтила выше всех тебя, и вот за что меня преступной назвал Крионт, и вот за что, схватив, от всех друзей увлек от милых сердцу бездетную, не знавшую любви, чтоб с мертвыми похоронить живую. Но в чем моя вина, о боги? Нет. Зачем к богам невнемлющим взываю? Кого из них о помощи молю, воздав им честь? Я гибну за несчастье. Когда неправду терпят сами боги, пускай умру, пускай меня зовут преступную, но коли вы преступны, враги мои, то не желаю вам страдать сильнее, чем я теперь страдаю. Финита. Мне казалось, что через движение я могу передать больше, потому что в этой же пластической группе были и мои актеры. И мы могли с ними, у нас не было барьера языка с югославами, и поэтому мы могли очень дружно решать все проблемы хора. Помимо, конечно, образа самой Электры. И, по-моему, Демидову полюбили в Греции, и она стала у вас работать, появляться, во всяком случае, со своими работами в Греции. Какие сложности были? Но мы играли в двух залах. Сперва в маленьком зале, там были свои проблемы. Голосовые в маленьком зале отсутствовали, но когда мы вышли на большую сцену Мегарол, там начались, конечно, проблемы голосовые. То есть техника уже должна была приобретаться артистами, особая техника полета звука, чтобы он летел на далекие расстояния, как, предположим, вчера наверху в открытом прекрасном нашем амфитеатре, который сам внушает трепет помимо наших исполнительских качеств. Там вообще атмосфера удивительная. Конечно, надо приложить усилия, чтобы сохранить, потому что он постепенно историю давит, он начинает оседать. И видно, что сам он дышит какими-то трагическими нотами. И, видимо, можно больше к нему часто обращаться, к созданию наших далеких предков, ибо они звучат в камнях, в скалах, во всем, в небе, обращение туда и вниз, к Персифонам туда. То есть, значит, встают проблемы, как всегда, проблемы отношения, как строить хоры, как они реагируют на происходящее на сцене. Они иногда, по моему мнению, надо приветствовать любой эксперимент, потому что это есть попытка поиска новых форм. И когда, предположим, господа американцы играли здесь на малой сцене электро, то, в общем, я им был благодарен, потому что, несмотря, я понимаю, здесь были и критические замечания, но они вот с такой наивностью и непосредственностью той культуры Америки, они старались проникнуть в это и находили и юмор, и какие-то нюансы, например, у Вестника. Он был очень хороший актер. Я отвлекся от своей лекции, но о своем как-то говорить довольно глупо себя чувствую. А вот как-то чужое оглянуть, поэтому взглянуть. Я очень благодарен, например, Сузуки, как он через свою культуру совершенно другую показывал там же и лепту. И это, конечно, было захватывающе здесь. Потому что весь тренинг, который делает господин Сузуки со своими учениками, многолетний тренинг главным образом сосредоточен весь на балансе всего, то есть движения, голоса, порыва. Это, конечно, очень впечатляет его работу в этом направлении. Да и Бог Вилсон, и твои, так сказать, как-то думаю, что вот то, что появилась такая любовь к драматургии, к трагедии, к Аристофану, как всей вашей палитре греческой, я считаю, что это замечательное явление, и что оно должно быть продолжено. Извините за многословие.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your... thank you so much for your impressive words. And we will have, I suppose, as usual, the discussion at the end of the section. Now I ask if Mr. Kabulov is here. Yes, would you come please? Would you please begin?
So I slightly changed the genre of the talking, so it turns to more to the academic talk. So the theme of the topic of my talk will be the tragedy at Alexandrinsky stage. It is the National Theatre of Russia, Alexandrinsky Theatre in St. Petersburg. Three versions of Meyerhold's Masquerade. It is the work of Severin Meyerhold, who works in Alexandrinsky about 10 years, and he staged there about 20 productions. In my talk, I will focus on the problems of staging tragedy on the academic stage within the avant-garde intentions of on the turn of 19th and 20th centuries. Alexandrinsky Theatre was constructed in classic style by architect Carlo Rossi in 1832, and its creation had the aim to find the formula of ideal performing space, closely connected with different trends of world theatre. From outside, it looks like a classic temple with the white columns, the figure of Apollo on the fronton, and the statues of Moses on the facades. But the interior of the spectating hall and the construction of the stage was typical for the Italian circle theatres. Only some elements of the decor imitate ancient motifs. Several times during Alexandrinsky's history, its artistic leaders tried to realize the idea of staging here the plays from the repertoire of the ancient Greek theatre and to renovate the traditions of Greek performing arts. First experiments came back to 1830s when the artistic director, Prince Alexander Shakhovskoy, under the influence of German romantics, who was searching the way to break the contemporary structure of performing space, staged his adaptations of Sophocles, Euripides, and Aristophanes. Shakhovskoy established the special features of so-called Greek theatricality as he imagined it by himself. The next step was done in the very beginning of 20th century by the famous actor and director Yuri Azarovsky, in deep cooperation with famous Russian writer and philosopher Dmitry Merezhkovsky, who translated several plays of Sophocles and Euripides. They want to break down the realistic and naturalistic trend of contemporary theatre, the trend that of copying life on stage, and struggled against Stanislavski's theatre model. In this case, the reciting manner of Alexandrinsky's actors seemed to be helpful for renovation of Greek theatre and for creation of the new sort of conventional theatre language. In 1901-1902, there appeared two productions of Oedipus in Cologne and Hippolytos, designed by famous Russian painter Leon Bakst. For this purpose, Azarovsky and Bakst traveled to Greece, visited Athens and Delphos, and examined a lot of materials devoted to the ancient Greek theatre. But the productions was full of deep contradictions. From one hand, Azarovsky and Bakst tried to create the elements of ancient performing space on the box stage, but from the other hand, they couldn't go away from decorative imitation of occasionally stressed elements of ancient Greek theatre model. It was nothing to do with the contemporary naturalistic theatre, but it was too far from the understanding of the substance of ancient Greek trend. When in 1908 Meyerhold came to the imperial theatres, he also thought about Greek theatre model. As we know, he made experiments with musical reciting with Mikhail Gnesin and staged musical versions of ancient myths in Mariinsky Opera Theatre. It was Gluck's Orfeo and Richard Strauss' Electra. He also traveled to Greece and also visited Delphi. There existed a special letter where Meyerhold described his impression of his traveling. But during his work, he came to the conclusion that the modern theatre could only imitate or stylize the Greek model. But the main idea is to uncover the substance and to find this, the scenic structure and theatre technique that could reveal the structure of substantial Greek tragedy. From the idea of traditionalism in the frames of stylization, he began to move in the direction of tragedy, and the story of his masquerade demonstrates that this way led him to the substantial tragic model. The idea of masked ball, the masquerade, came to Meyerhold in 1911 from the atmosphere of the epoch, from the aesthetic play with the masks and archetypes of theatre. Meyerhold uncovered the tragedy that was hidden everywhere in vivacity or joyful movements and masks gay. The most representative in the analyzing of this production is the following after its musical score. It is so because Meyerhold based the scenic structure of his production on musical principles. Firstly, the music was forthcoming new production of Masked Ball was written by the composer and poet Mikhail Kuzmin, who is the symbolic figure of new theatrical epoch. In 1911, Kuzmin already finished 10 pieces, but very soon the director was disappointed in this music. Meyerhold found it too modernistic and connected more with the contemporary need. Meyerhold didn't want to replace the dramatic structure of action by the poetics of external contrasts. His intention was rather deep. If we follow the director's intention, we could clearly see that step by step, Meyerhold moved from the contemporary drama to the poetic of eternal generalizations. Definitely, that the musical dramaturgy of the production was created according to the director's plan. In Meyerhold's archive, we found out a sheet of paper with the musical scheme of the action. This was in fact the dramatic and musical sketch of the future production. We can see that Meyerhold tried to create musical and space dramaturgy of scenic action in its unity. The director divided musical pieces into parts and was to play by two separate orchestras. One of these orchestras Meyerhold wanted to place in offstage space, behind the decors and curtains, and the other under the stage. This sheet of paper was divided in 3 columns. In the first, Meyerhold marked the pieces of our offstage orchestra. In the other, we could find the text of Lermontov's play that was connected with the definite music. And in the third, there are the list of pieces for the orchestra under the stage. This 3-part scheme is closely connected with 3 scenic zones that was defined by the director and designer Alexander Golovin. In fact, they divided the performance space in 3 levels: orchestra pool, the hell; stage, the earth; and offstage, the heaven. The most spaced out orchestra pool was covered with proscenium, and red walls of the orchestra pool seems to be the fire of the hell. Meyerhold wanted to place one of the orchestras and the chorus under the proscenium. The orchestra under proscenium should to stress the infernal moments of the action. This orchestra played the music for all pantomimes, the key episode that was presented in rapide. The offstage orchestra played so-called action music. The main episode of Masked Ball ended with the gallop played by both orchestras that gave the impression of Devil's Bacchanalia, that the motives of the Offenbach could be clearly heard. In the final of the action, both orchestras and the chorus mixed in its united force to create the strong symphony ending. This musical and space dramaturgy had the aim to create the mystery. This trend in director's intention came into conflict with the stylistic of Kuzmin's music. As we said, these pieces based on the principles of contrast, but not on the dramatic development. It seems that exactly at that time, Meyerhold came to the idea of creating the scenic symphony. The idea of musical scenic symphonies was found out when the Kuzmin's music was already composed and the new ideas couldn't be realized in these forms. So, Meyerhold needed the symphonistic scale. The new version of music was composed by the outstanding Russian composer Alexander Glazunov, who developed the highest tradition of Tchaikovsky's symphonies. It is important that in Glazunov's score, the system of leitmotifs became the dominant in the musical dramaturgy. The last final requiem leads us to the catharsis in the ending. Glazunov's requiem was too different from the Kuzmin's one. It is too far from the Kuzmin's disappointment in life and reflects the light sorrow about the artist's fate. Glazunov and Meyerhold tried to generalize the motives of Lermontov's drama and move from the concrete dramatic story to the mystery of a human life. The next idea that came to Meyerhold is the doubleness of masked ball pantomime and contains already in the structure of main drama collisions. In Meyerhold archive, we could find several sheets of paper with schemes of pantomime episodes. It was well known, but nobody of the researchers paid attention that it could be compared with the musical episodes of dances. In this case, it could be composed in a complete pantomime introductional play that alluded with the future drama. The masked ball intrigue developed firstly in this pantomime in masks. The pantomime contained 9 episodes. All these pantomime episodes took place before the main heroes came out on the stage. It means that the tragedy already exists in the masked ball crowd and only waits for victims. In any case, the main conflict was inside the masked world, and the hero was deeply involved in this roundabout. In Masked Ball, main heroes in the main episode was manipulated by personages in masks. In the end of the imperial epoch, the opening night of Masked Ball took place a day before the February Revolution, when Russian Empire falls down. Meyerhold created the production where he revealed how the heroes was caught with the power of destiny in the circle of precious masks game that seems to replace and annihilate the real human emotions. The conflict was hidden inside the masked world, and the final black gas funeral curtain had to cover all the illusory life with ash. If we compare the director's score of 1917 version with the version of 1938, we could clearly see that the structure of action developed from the mystery to oratory. The conflict between the main hero and the masked crowd now was considered as external and became more strong and keen. From the early 30s, it became clear that the contradictions between the human personality and strong social force became the dominant and tragic. The figure of unknown lost a lot of his mystic features and became a symbol of social evil. The same transformation happened with the other heroes, and from infernal personages they became a real intrigue makers. In 1930s, Meyerhold twice made the correction in his production. Firstly, in 1933, he concentrated the main action of Masked Ball at the proscenium. If in the version of 1917, the most of action took place in the open stage and only pantomimes was played with the falling curtain, from 1933, on the contrary, the most of action was performed at the proscenium and only in episodes where the dangerous force of the masked crowd reveals itself. The curtain rose up and the whole stage was offered to this mysterious drama. In 1938, before the tragic ending of his career in awful ages of Stalinist terror, Meyerhold used a new detail in the decor and mise-en-scène. There appeared the gilded grate that became a line of demarcation between the heroes and hostile masked world. In this version, Meyerhold concentrated the episodes of masked ball game and turned the action to more static oratory form. The masked crowd became monumental and looks like a chorus mass. The fatal power of times became to drive the life of this production. In 1940, Meyerhold was killed by Stalinist system, but masked ball was in run even after the death of without Meyerhold's name on the poster. In 1941, Hitler's bomb destroyed the building of Alexandrinsky Theater, and some of the decor was burned in fire. The company of Alexandrinsky was evacuated to Siberia, but there, in Novosibirsk, masked ball was performed without costumes and decor as the oratory, with dramatic episodes in Philharmonia Hall. After the end of Second World War, when the company returned to St. Petersburg, to Leningrad, masked ball in its concert version was in the repertoire of Grand Hall of Leningrad Philharmonia. The same actors, the same structure of action, but it looks like the forms was frozen in classical static as the marble columns in the former nobility hall where Philharmonic Society now is situated. Not occasionally, masquerade was called the ideal or eternal production. The structure of historical given circumstances and vectors of audience's perception created the special contextual superplot of this production and led Meyerhold to reveal the substantial drama of human personality struggle with its fate. So, under the mask of decorative, stylized theatricality that mixed all the figures of wild carnival, we could find the classical tragic background. Thank you.
Thank you so much for explaining the historical dimension of the Russian tradition and rediscovering the Greek drama. We turn over to the next lecture, Valery Fokin, who is the director of the Meyerhold Center in Moscow now, and will speak about the government's inspector directed by Meyerhold in 1926 as a forebody of this damning tragedy.
Меня попросили рассказать о одном из шедевров Всеволода Мейерхольда, о постановке «Ревизора» пьесы Гоголя, которая была поставлена им в 1926 году в Москве в театре имени себя. No translation.
No translation.
There's no translation.
Да, возьми мои.
Мне не надо, нет.
Ему не надо там что говорить.
It's okay? Good. Меня попросили рассказать о спектакле, одном из великих спектаклей Всеволода Мейерхольда, «Ревизоре», пьесе Николая Гоголя, который был поставлен в 1926 году в Москве в театре имени Мейерхольда. Мейерхольд руководил театром, который назывался его именем. Дело в том, что спектакль поставлен в 1926 году, и прошло совсем еще немного времени после революции Октябрьской, и сталинские репрессии, и те миллионы людей, которые погибнут не тысячи, а миллионы, значительно больше, чем во время войны Второй мировой в России. Это все будет позже, хотя начало уже существует. Сделано несколько открытий в этом спектакле Мейерхольдом, которые сегодня абсолютно известны, я не буду их повторять. Они дали
толчки европейской школе режиссуры, мировой школе режиссуры. Именно то, что впервые Мейерхольд предложил сценическую редакцию, составленную из 5 вариантов пьесы, и таким образом предложил ставить не просто одну пьесу, а ставить весь мир автора. Весь мир Гоголя был поставлен на основе пьесы «Ревизор». Это абсолютно принципиальное, новаторское предложение. Второе, то, что спектакль был организован по законам музыки, по законам музыкальной композиции, при этом музыка могла реально не звучать. Она была внутри актеров. То есть вся композиция спектакля была основана на музыкальных законах. Это тоже открытие, которое сегодня тоже далеко не каждый понимает, но далеко не каждый может сделать. Но это открытие были впервые так внятно, так серьезно предложено Всеволодом Мейерхольдом. И, наконец, третье, это то, что пьеса была переведена из одного жанра в другой жанр. Пьеса, которая имеет историю в России как комедия, имела особенно сильную историю до 26 года, как только комедия. И вдруг пьеса переведена в трагедийный жанр, переведена в плоскость трагическую. Это был абсолютно новаторский шаг, который многие просто не поняли. Более того, ни один из спектаклей Мейерхольда не вызывал таких споров, таких бурных дискуссий. Были написаны даже эпиграммы. Один из известных поэтов советских даже написал такую эпиграмму под названием «Убийца», где писал о том, что смех, гоголевский смех, убил ты наповал. То есть, как ты мог вот, сделать не смешную историю из смешной истории и так далее. И вот в этом переводе как раз и содержится тема вот моей маленькой информации, поскольку для Мейерхольда это было не только познание Гоголя и не только чисто эстетическая задача. Это была задача личная, которую он, конечно же, интуитивно во многом, как гениальный режиссер, сознавал. В этом спектакле было абсолютно явно осуществлено предчувствие того царства мертвых, или той жизни, той диктатуры, того диктата пошлости, которая вернется жестокостью и мертвыми душами, которая потом произойдет в Советском Союзе и в России на протяжении многих лет. С самого начала спектакля, когда, если вы знаете эту пьесу гоголевскую, чиновники выезжали на маленькой площадке вперед к зрителям, они сидели очень тесно и курили трубки, и сидели в дыму, как будто облако какое-то приближалось. Уже было ощущение некого страха. Страх. Они уже сидели как некие крысы, которые приготовились к чему-то страшному. Когда им говорили о том, что приезжает ревизор, они мгновенно все куда-то падали вниз, под станок, прятались. И в этом уже было что-то такое от Босха, от Брейгеля, от Гойи, от каких-то небытовых, нереалистических приемов. Как правило, главного героя, которого принимают за ревизора, его фамилия Хлестаков, имя его Хлестаков, всегда играли неким таким пустым, веселым, легким человеком, который шутит, смеется, такой даже Гоголь пишет в приватке, что он весь как такой летун, он летит, он летит. Здесь впервые Мейерхольд выводит в исполнении замечательного актера Эраста Гарина, абсолютно мрачного типа, одетого в черное, который как некий дьявольский, агент дьявола, как некий абсолютно такой мистический персонаж, абсолютно непроницаемый, очень, так сказать, сквозь зубы говорящий свои реплики, странный, потому что он то пьянеет, то тут же трезвеет, его ничем нельзя взять, от него тоже идет чувство страха и чувство какого-то такого жонглирования ситуации. Поэтому все чиновники, включая женщин, с одной стороны пугаются его, с другой стороны их тянет к нему, потому что они не понимают, что это такое. Это некий нереалистический персонаж. Финал спектакля был потрясающий. У Гоголя написана немая сцена в конце. Гоголь пишет, что после известия, что приехал настоящий ревизор, актеры должны застыть в позах и находиться в этой мизансцене не менее 2 минут. 2 минуты — это очень много для театра, вы понимаете. И даже тогда, в те времена, никто не решался эту сцену воспроизводить вот так буквально, потому что это невозможно. Мейерхольд поступил следующим образом. Опускалось огромное полотно, которое закрывало всю сцену, и на этом полотне было написано: «К вам приехал ревизор». И чиновники в ужасе огромной толпой бежали от этой надписи в зрительный зал. И бежали по проходам мимо зрителей и убегали в ужасе. И когда эта тряпка, этот занавес, так называемый, поднимался наверх, мы видели застывших этих же актеров, застывших в немой мизансцене. Была немая сцена. И вот они так стояли, 10 секунд, 15, 30, 40, и потом зритель понимал, что это восковые фигуры. Он предвосхитил музей мадам Тюссо. Было точно воспроизведены актеры, были сделаны слепки, восковые фигуры, одетые так же. И потом на поклоны уже актеры выходили и вставали, каждый рядом со своим персонажем. То есть таким образом вот это вот, то, что я сказал, царство мертвых, вот этот застывший ужас, который потом будет переживать страна, был им уже интуитивно во многом, ну и сознательно, я думаю, тоже в этой трагедии был реализован. Дело в том, что Мейерхольд принял революцию, как вы знаете, с огромной радостью. Очень открыто, но прежде всего принял ее как художник, понимая, что это новое изменение, это новое искусство, которое идет. Вы знаете, в 20-х годах был бум искусства в Советской России, и в живописи, и в архитектуре, и в театре. Но как человек 19 века, и как человек, воспитанный петербургской культурой, а Петербург в то время был центр культуры и литературы, и драматургии, как человек, проработавший в Александрийском театре 10 лет, и как человек, воспитанный на другой, повторяю, литературе и культуре, он с какого-то момента стал понимать, что это иллюзия. Он стал чувственно понимать, что тут нет культуры, тут есть варварство. Более того, тут есть совершенно другой уклад. Есть тот социалистический реализм, который потом на протяжении долгих лет будет душить, идеологически душить и уничтожать все художественное в стране. И вот через Гоголя, благодаря Гоголю, он сказал свою личную боль, свое личное ощущение от того, что произойдет. В этом смысле это абсолютно пророческая постановка, которая, помимо всего прочего, дала, как я повторяю, совершенно вот другие новые эстетические открытия. Но потом долго будем иметь этих мертвых правителей. Люди старшего поколения помнят Леонида Ильича Брежнева, например, которого маска застывшая, так сказать, его водили под руки, и тем не менее мы это имели в виду, все смеялись, смотрели в телевизор, все просто... Это был фарс, даже больше, чем фарс. Это все, вот это царство мертвых, вот эта власть мертвых душ, еще физически вроде ходячих, но абсолютно мертвых, была в этом спектакле уже, так сказать, найдена Мейерхольдом. Спасибо. Thank you very much.
Welcome counterpart to ancient tragedy. And now we have time for a short discussion, because in the next section, ethyl advent will not come. It will fall out.